The messages that shouldn't have been sent. Emily never expected a random text to spiral into something that would haunt her. It all began when her best friend, Lily, invited her over to hang out at her boyfriend's house. That's when she first saw Jake. He was older, self-assured, and had this quiet intensity that made her pulse quicken. She wasn't supposed to like him, but she did. Days passed, and she couldn't shake him from her thoughts. On impulse, she got his number from Lily's boyfriend and decided to send him a message anonymously. "You don't know me, but I think you're interesting." She figured it would be fun, a harmless little mystery. To her surprise, Jake played along. Their texts turned into a nightly ritual, their words laced with intrigue and flirtation. Emily reveled in the thrill of it all, believing she had the upper hand, believing he had no clue who she was. But she was wrong. Jake had figured it out early on. Whether it was a slip in her words or a hint from a friend, he knew. But he didn't tell her. Instead, he let the game continue, letting her believe she was invisible behind the screen. Then came the night everything shifted. Lily suggested they all meet up, and Emily found herself face to face with Jake. The look in his eyes sent a chill down her spine. Amusement, familiarity, something deeper. Reality stripped away the comfort of their messages. Their conversations felt different in person, strained and uncertain. Yet after that night, their late-night calls continued. He still teased, still flirted, still made her feel special. Until he didn't. The calls stopped. The texts became sparse. Emily refused to reach out, refused to seem desperate. But she thought of him constantly, and the dreams came. 10 times in 2 months. His absence was louder than any words he had ever sent. One night, against her better judgment, she finally caved. "Did I do something wrong?" The message sat there unread. And in that silence, she found her answer. A week passed. Then another. Emily tried to push him from her mind, but it was impossible. One evening, she found herself scrolling through their old messages, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. She wanted to reach out to demand an explanation, but she didn't. Instead, she deleted his number. The next night, her phone buzzed. A number with no name, a message that made her breath hitch. "Meet me." Her heart pounded as she stared at the screen. Was it him? Did she even want to know? The rational part of her screamed to ignore it, but her fingers had already begun to type. "Where?" 3 dots appeared. Then a single word. "Outside." Emily's pulse skyrocketed as she crept to her window. There, standing beneath the streetlight, was Jake. His hands stuffed in his pockets, his gaze locked onto hers. For a moment, she hesitated. Then, without a second thought, she grabbed her jacket and stepped outside, the cool air sharp against her skin. Whatever this was, whatever it had been, she needed answers. And this time, she wouldn't let him disappear without them. Jake led her down the quiet street, his expression unreadable. They walked in silence until they reached a small park. Then, without warning, he gestured ahead. Emily's breath caught as she took in the scene before her. A secluded gazebo, draped in fairy lights. A small table set for 2, complete with candles and a bouquet of white roses. The scent of fresh flowers and crisp night air surrounded them. "You did this?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. Jake offered a small smile. "I wanted to make up for disappearing. To explain." Emily hesitated before stepping forward, her heart pounding. "Then explain." He pulled out a chair for her, and as she sat, he took the seat across from her. "I got scared," he admitted. "I realized I liked you, really liked you, and I didn't know how to handle it. So, I pulled away." Emily's fingers traced the edge of the tablecloth. "You could have just told me." "I know," he sighed. "I didn't want to mess things up, but I already did." She studied him, the flickering candlelight reflecting in his eyes. "And now," Jake reached for her hand across the table, his touch warm and steady. "Now I want to try again. If you'll let me." Emily inhaled sharply, her emotions swirling. She had spent so long wondering, hurting, missing him. But now, sitting here with him looking at her like that, maybe it wasn't too late. She squeezed his hand gently. Let's see where this goes. Jake's smile was slow, genuine. I'd like that. And for the first time in months, Emily felt something shift inside her. A quiet hope, flickering like the candles between them. The next morning, Emily woke up feeling lighter than she had in weeks. The memory of the previous night lingered in her mind like a dream she didn't want to end. She replayed every glance, every word, the warmth of Jake's hand in hers. Butterflies danced in her stomach, and she couldn't help but smile. As she lay in bed, her phone buzzed. Her heart skipped a beat. Jake. Good morning, beautiful. I hope you slept well. Last night was perfect. Emily bit her lip, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. Good morning. It really was. I still can't believe you did all that. Jake, believe it. I wanted to make up for lost time. Are you free today? Her heart fluttered. I think I can clear my schedule. Jake, good. Be ready in an hour. No hints, just trust me. Excitement buzzed through her veins as she jumped out of bed. She had no idea what he had planned, but for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel the weight of uncertainty pressing down on her. An hour later, Jake was waiting outside, leaning against his car with a playful smirk. Ready for an adventure? Emily grinned. Always. The day unfolded like something out of a movie. Jake took her to a hidden little cafe on the outskirts of town, where they shared pastries and laughed over inside jokes. Then, he surprised her with a trip to a quiet lake, where they rented a small boat and drifted on the water, soaking in the sun and the sound of each other's laughter. Every touch, every stolen glance made her heart race. As the sun began to set, they sat on the dock, feet dangling above the water. Jake turned to her, his expression soft. I don't want to mess this up again. Emily met his gaze, warmth spreading through her chest. Then don't. Jake smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her face. Deal. Just as their lips met in the golden light, a sharp voice cut through the air. Jake. Emily's stomach twisted as she turned to see a girl standing at the edge of the dock. Her arms crossed, eyes filled with something dangerously close to betrayal. Jake stiffened. Sophie. What are you doing here? Emily's heart pounded. Sophie? Who was she? And why did it feel like her perfect moment was crumbling before her eyes? Emily and the guy she had been seeing started to rebuild their communication. They spent time together, talking, laughing, and promising each other that there would be no more games. She began to feel that there was something real between them, and even started thinking that maybe things were finally falling into place. He had started calling her again at night, texting her, and even asking about her plans for the weekend. Feeling that they were finally on the same page, Emily decided to open up to him more, sharing her thoughts and feelings. She even began to think that maybe, just maybe, she had a future with him. But then, one day, everything changed. It was a quiet evening when Emily received a message from his friend, the one they'd hung out with a couple of weeks ago. Sophie is back in town, it said briefly. She wants to talk to him. I think it's important. Emily couldn't believe her eyes. Sophie? The same girl he had broken up with before they started seeing each other. Who was this Sophie, and why was he letting her back into his life? Over the next few days, Emily noticed a shift in his behavior. He became more distant, responding to her messages late, even avoiding her calls. Felt like he was hiding something. Emily decided she needed to find out more. She drove to his apartment where he lived with a few friends. When she arrived, she saw him sitting on the couch with Sophie. She was holding his hand, and they were talking. You need to leave, he said coldly when he saw Emily. We need to talk. Emily realized something wasn't right. It seemed like Sophie and he still had unfinished business. She turned and left, but in the car on the way home, she started questioning herself. Had he been honest with her? Was this just another one of his broken promises? Emily spent the next few days replaying the scene over and over in her head. She couldn't shake the feeling that she had missed something, that there was a side of him she hadn't fully understood. Sophie's sudden reappearance and the way they seemed so comfortable with each other left her feeling uneasy, like she was the outsider in their story. Despite the distance that had grown between them, Emily couldn't help but reach out again. She needed answers or at least some closure. So, One evening, she sent him a simple message. "Can we talk?" He responded almost immediately, and they agreed to meet at the same cafe where they'd had their first real conversation. When she arrived, he was already there, sitting nervously at a corner table. His expression softened when he saw her, but there was still something distant in his eyes. "I know this is confusing," he started, avoiding her gaze. "Sophie and we have history. We weren't just in a relationship, we had plans. I promised her things that I thought I'd never have to keep. But then, things changed, and we broke up. I didn't think she'd come back into my life like this." Emily listened, trying to hold back the rush of emotions. "But why didn't you tell me any of this? Why hide it?" "I didn't want to hurt you," he admitted, his voice soft. "I care about you, Emily. But Sophie, she believes I owe her something. And maybe, in a way, I do. There's so much unfinished between us. Things I can't just ignore." Emily felt a lump form in her throat. She didn't know what to say. Part of her wanted to walk away, but another part of her still cared about him deeply, and hearing his vulnerability made her hesitate. "Do you still have feelings for her?" Emily asked quietly, the question hanging in the air. He looked down at his hands for a moment, then met her gaze. "I don't know. I think I will always care for her. But I don't think that's the same as being in love with her. What I feel for you, it's different. It's real. But I can't promise you it's simple." The uncertainty in his voice made Emily's heart ache. She wasn't sure if she was ready for this kind of emotional roller coaster, but she also wasn't ready to walk away just yet. "So, what does this mean for us?" He hesitated for a moment before answering. "I need to figure things out with Sophie. I owe it to both of us. But I don't want to lose you, Emily. I hope you'll wait, but I understand if you don't." There was silence between them, both of them caught in a limbo. Emily felt the weight of his words. She could either wait for him to resolve his past or walk away, choosing herself over a future filled with uncertainty. Finally, Emily stood up and took a deep breath. "I need to think. I can't promise you anything right now." He nodded, his expression filled with regret, but also understanding. As Emily walked away, she knew that no matter what she chose, it wouldn't be easy. She had to decide whether she could trust him to close the chapter with Sophie and open a new one with her, or if it was time to let go for good. The next few days felt like a blur for Emily. She tried to focus on her work, to distract herself from the constant thoughts of him. But every time she closed her eyes, she saw his face, heard his voice. It was as though her mind was in conflict with her heart, one side telling her to wait and the other urging her to move on. Meanwhile, he had been giving her space as promised. He hadn't called or texted her, and she started to wonder if that meant he had made his decision. Maybe he was going back to Sophie, trying to rebuild what they once had. But then, just as Emily was beginning to convince herself that she was better off without him, she received a message from him late one evening. "I need to talk. It's important." Her heart skipped a beat. She wasn't sure what she was expecting, but a part of her feared that he would tell her that he was choosing Sophie. They agreed to meet at a quiet park, a place they had visited together before. When she arrived, he was already there, standing under the soft glow of a street lamp. He looked different, more tired than she had ever seen him, as though the weight of his decisions was finally catching up with him. "I've made my choice," he said, his voice shaky but steady. "I can't keep living in the past. Sophie and we have a history, but that's all it is now. I don't want to go back to what we had. I don't want to lose you, Emily." Emily's heart raced. She hadn't expected this. Part of her still felt hesitant, unsure of whether to believe him completely, but the sincerity in his eyes made her pause. "I don't want you to choose me out of guilt," she said softly. "I need to know you're choosing me because you want to, not because you think you owe it to her." "I know," he replied quickly, taking a step closer. "I'm choosing you because what I have with you feels right. I've spent too long avoiding it, afraid of what might happen. But now I realize I can't keep running from what I feel." Emily searched his eyes, looking for any sign of doubt. She found none. For the first time, she felt like he was truly being honest with her. "Are you sure?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. He nodded. I've never been more sure of anything in my life. For a moment, they just stood there, the world around them quiet except for the distant hum of the city. Emily felt a mix of relief and fear. Relief that he had finally made up his mind, but fear that it wouldn't last, that maybe something would pull him away again. I don't want to rush into anything, she said, taking a deep breath. But I want to try, if you're sure. I'm sure, he said firmly, his hand reaching out for hers. And I'll prove it, every day. As Emily took his hand, she felt a sense of hope flicker inside her. It wouldn't be easy, and there would always be lingering doubts, but for the first time in a long time, she believed that maybe, just maybe, they could make this work. In the weeks that followed, Emily and he navigated their relationship carefully. They spent more time together, getting to know each other in new ways. He was consistent with his words and actions, always showing up when he said he would, always calling when he promised. It felt good, and for the first time, Emily started to believe that maybe this could work. Maybe they could really have something. However, the peace didn't last long. One night, Emily received a call from her friend, the same one who had been there when she first met him. I think you should know something, her friend said, sounding cautious. Sophie reached out to him again. She's been texting him. Emily's stomach dropped. She tried to keep her cool, but the words echoed in her mind. Sophie. She thought she had been out of the picture for good. I don't know what it means, but he hasn't mentioned it to you? Her friend asked, sensing the tension. Emily hung up quickly, her heart racing. Why hadn't he told her about this? She had believed him when he said he was done with Sophie. Later that night, as they were having dinner together, Emily decided to bring it up. I heard from a friend that Sophie contacted you again, she said, trying to keep her voice steady, though it wavered with uncertainty. He froze for a moment, his fork halfway to his mouth, and then placed it down slowly. Emily, why didn't you tell me? She interrupted, her voice rising with hurt. You promised me you were over her, that there was nothing between you two anymore. And now this. I didn't want to hurt you, he replied quietly, his eyes avoiding hers. Sophie, she's not just some ex. We were supposed to have a future together. And I know it's hard for you to understand, but there's a part of me that still cares about her. But it's not the same as what I feel for you. I don't want to lose what we have, Emily. But I didn't want to drag you into this. I thought I could handle it myself. Emily could feel the weight of his words, but the sting of betrayal still lingered. She had trusted him. She had let herself believe that they were moving forward, that they were finally free of the past. And now it felt like everything was crumbling around her. I need some space, she whispered, standing up and walking toward the door. I need to think about this. I can't keep wondering if I'm just someone to fill the gap until you figure things out with her. He stood up, rushing toward her, but she stopped him with a glance. I'm not saying it's over, but I can't keep feeling like I'm second place. I need you to be honest with me, and I need you to make a choice. She left before he could say anything else, her heart heavy with doubt. Could he truly choose her, or would Sophie always have a hold on him? Emily had spent days trying to figure out whether she could trust him. Every moment of silence from Jake felt like a warning. He hadn't called, hadn't texted. He seemed to be giving her the space she asked for, but something in her gut told her that something was wrong. She couldn't shake the nagging feeling that Sophie was still in the picture, and maybe, just maybe, Jake was still caught between the two of them. Her phone buzzed late one night, an unknown number. Hesitantly, she picked it up, already dreading the possibility. Emily, I need to talk to you. It's important. Please meet me at the park where we first met. I'm sorry. The message read. Her heart dropped. It was Jake. But why was he apologizing? Why didn't he just call her? Why now? She didn't hesitate. She grabbed her coat and rushed out the door, unable to shake the feeling that something was about to shatter between them. When she arrived at the park, the darkness around her felt suffocating. She could see Jake standing by the bench where they had shared their first real conversation, his head down, hands in his pockets. There was no one else around. The air was thick with tension. Jake! She called, her voice trembling slightly. He turned to face her, and she immediately saw it. His eyes, normally warm, were cold and distant. It was as though the person she had once known was no longer there. "Emily, I need to tell you something," he said, his voice strained. "I've been seeing Sophie again. I never stopped thinking about her. And I kissed her tonight. I don't know why I did it. I was confused, and Before he could finish, Emily felt a surge of anger and betrayal. "So that's it? You couldn't just be honest with me? You couldn't even give me the respect of telling me the truth? I was right. I was always second to her." "No," Jake said quickly, stepping forward. "It's not like that. Sophie means something to me, yes. But I didn't want to hurt you. I care about you, Emily."
I'm sorry.
Suddenly, the sound of footsteps interrupted them. Emily turned just as a figure emerged from the shadows. It was Sophie. She stepped into the light, her eyes gleaming with a mixture of satisfaction and triumph. "So, this is it, huh?" Sophie said, her tone mocking. "You were always his second choice, Emily. He might have been confused, but he's always known who he wanted. It's been me all along." Emily's blood ran cold. She felt a surge of betrayal so sharp, it almost knocked the wind out of her. She had trusted him, believed his promises. And now here was Sophie, standing between them as if she had always been in the picture, playing the role of the one who had the real claim to him. Jake took a step back, his face contorted in guilt and shame.
I'm sorry, Emily.
I should have been honest with you from the start. I never meant for it to go this far." The cold, hard truth settled in Emily's chest like a weight she couldn't lift. She felt like a fool. The person she thought she could build something with, had allowed herself to believe in, had just betrayed her in the worst way possible. "I thought you were different," Emily said, her voice shaking with a mixture of hurt and anger. "But I guess I was wrong. You never really let go of her. You never really chose me." Without waiting for a response, she turned and walked away, her heart breaking with every step. Behind her, she heard Jake calling her name, but she didn't look back. She couldn't. It was over. And Sophie, she had won. As Emily disappeared into the night, she realized that sometimes the hardest lessons were the ones that left you with nothing but the pieces of a broken heart. But she wouldn't let that be the end of her story. She would rebuild. She would be stronger. Jake and Sophie? They were a part of her past now. And as the night swallowed her whole, Emily knew she was done being anyone's second choice. Final conclusion. In the end, Emily learned a painful but vital lesson. Not all love stories are meant to be. Sometimes, no matter how much you invest, how deeply you care, the person you hope will choose you might never truly see you the way you deserve to be seen. She had spent so long holding on to a dream, thinking that with time, things would align, but the reality was different. The person she had believed in had betrayed her trust, choosing someone else, even if that choice came wrapped in confusion and regret. But with the heartbreak came clarity. Emily realized that being someone's second choice, or living in the shadow of their past, was never going to be enough. She had been waiting for someone to choose her fully, without hesitation, without the baggage of unresolved pasts. But she could no longer let her happiness be in someone else's hands. As the night fell and she walked away from Jake and Sophie, Emily made a promise to herself. No more settling for less than she deserved. She wouldn't waste another moment on someone who couldn't see her worth. The betrayal hurt, but it also freed her in a way she hadn't expected. She wasn't going to let the past define her future. Now, Emily was ready to rebuild on her own terms. She would focus on herself, embrace her independence, and be the person who chose her first. No longer would she be defined by someone else's choices. She was her own story, and she was going to write it boldly. In the end, sometimes the greatest love story you can have is the one you have with yourself.